If you're thinking about taking your live webinar into an evergreen or pre-recorded model anytime soon, there's a couple things that you have to know first so that you can make sure you're going to get the best result from that pre-recorded webinar. But first, I'm Kylee. I am one half of the Funnel Flippers, and we help business owners transition their exhausting live launch funnels over into an effortlessly evergreen funnel so they can get more time freedom and more predictable revenue. Jumping right in, if you're thinking about taking that live webinar into a pre-recorded version, the very first thing you need to do is look at your existing content. This is going to be much easier if you have a recorded version already. That way you can just watch the playback and look for any of these things that are happening. Make sure you're removing any references to an open or close cart, any dates that may be mentioned, any like fast acting bonuses, anything related to that live launch version or that live webinar that you were doing. You want to make sure you take those out. This is going to also vary a little bit. So if you're using a pre-recorded webinar to still go into a live launch, you can keep some of those references if it's the same in this live launch, but you definitely want to remove any dates or anything that's going to be different. If it's rolling into an evergreen funnel instead of that live launch, then you're going to want to remove any references to anything that's open, close cart, etc. that I had just mentioned. Next, it would be really helpful for you to look at your analytics. So inside those analytics, look for where people are falling off inside of your webinar. That is going to be a deciding factor in, okay, maybe I need to adjust this content to improve engagement a little more because I see that people are frequently falling off, let's say at 8 minutes and then again at 22 minutes. So look at that, determine how you might be able to change that content to increase engagement and keep those people around longer. That's going to ensure that even in the pre-recorded version, your engagement's still there. You still have people staying until the end so they can get the most value from you inside of that webinar. Also, it's a really good idea to add additional engagement strategies inside of a pre-recorded version. And side note, you want to make sure people know that this is not live. You don't have to come out and say, hey, this is pre-recorded necessarily, but don't mislead them to believe that you are going to be there live answering their questions. Your consumers are intelligent. You have to give them credit for that. And don't mislead them to think that, you're going to be there one-to-one with them during this process. When we're talking engagement strategies, there are a couple different things you can do. You can even do it something simple like a lot of people do here on YouTube. You can bring in, GIFs onto the screen. You can add a poll onto the screen as well. Or just say, hey, add like a question sticker and say, hey, type your answer to this in the comments. Something to keep them involved in the content that you are presenting. And last on this first bullet point, essentially, is make sure that your content is giving them a quick win. So you want to ensure that the content you're presenting isn't just one big sales pitch. Give them value that they can take directly from your webinar, even if they aren't purchasing whatever you're offering at the end, and implement that to get some type of win. You want to make sure that their time is being used effectively by being with you inside that webinar. Don't, again, make it a big sales pitch. Give them something that they can feel good about spending that half hour, 2 hours with you. Moving on to mistake number 2, we want to make sure that you are using the correct software. Without the correct software, you're looking at tech issues at best, and at absolute worst, you're looking at having a pre-recorded webinar that you're spending 6 to 10 hours a week managing on the back end. So that's not what we're going for. If it's pre-recorded or evergreen, we want to be able to get that time freedom back to actually allow it to do its thing without us having to be typing away at our computer all these hours of the week. So when we're looking at the physical video and where it is going to live, we definitely prefer using a webinar software because it's going to allow you to get more data and more information from people who are watching the video. Whereas on the other hand, if you have a Vimeo video or a YouTube video just embedded on your landing page, you're not going to be able to get the statistics and the data that you want to be able to make tweaks and adjustments later on down the road, or even add in some special automations that we'll talk about here in a bit. So look at the webinar softwares that are available, see what is going to fit in your price range, what's going to be the most efficient for either your team members to implement or you to implement, what it has the smallest learning curve. But we definitely recommend using a webinar software, and you can still embed it in your landing page. So it still looks pretty. It still looks wonderful inside your landing page / watch page. I kind of use those terms interchangeably here, but you can make it look beautiful. You can embed it in there, and then you'll be able to get more information. What data should you be looking for when you're using a webinar software? 100% you should be looking at the number of watches, who is watching it. So out of all the people that signed up for this, what percentage of people are actually coming in and watching any portion of this webinar? Number 2, how often are they sticking around? Like, how long are they actually watching the webinar? That's going to be really good for, again, automations that we'll do based on their level of engagement later on. And then 3, where are people falling off? So where are you noticing people are kind of sizzling out and leaving the actual webinar? This is going to give you information on how you can improve this in the future. I'm not saying that you have to re-record this entire thing every other week or even every other month, but once, at least I would say probably once a year, you want to look at this information after you've collected it for a bit of time and then say, okay, this is where I'm seeing people are falling out or aren't so engaged. So maybe I want to go ahead and take another shot at this and see how I can improve it. Let's test it out and see what happens. The benefits of having this information as you proceed down the line is you're going to be able to adjust this directly based on what your audience is doing. Not polls, not surveys you send out in the emails, not the DMs you get, although you can take those into account too. But this data is directly based on your consumer's activity. So you can use that to make it better, to make other marketing decisions, like when you're going to send out email sequences, what content they're super engaged with. You can go ahead and create social media content, YouTube videos, emails, podcasts, all about those specific items because you use the right software and you're able to get that information without having to do any additional work. Mistake number 3 is going to be not automating with the customer journey in mind. A big thing that people forget when they're doing this transition is that your customer's journey will look different in a live webinar to a live launch than it will to a pre-recorded webinar, into an evergreen funnel, or even into a live launch. That customer journey is different. So when we are talking about an evergreen / pre-recorded webinar, you have to remember that the automations are oftentimes doing the building of trust for you. So keep the customer journey in mind when you are building out your automations. We want to support them, especially on high touch points. So look at your customer journey. See where those high touch points are. How are they feeling directly after your webinar? And how can you support them with emails, DMs, text messages, etc., whatever system you have in your backend? How can you use that system to support them after your webinar? How about 2 weeks after your webinar? How are they feeling? Is there a touch point there? Is there not a touch point there? You need to make these decisions in order to build out this automation sequence that is going to love on them and get them closer to you for you. And you can, of course, get in your DMs and do some of that manually as well if you want and if you have time. But otherwise, this automation is going to have your back to do all of that so you don't have to. The last note I have on this is sometimes it is hard to do this from the beginning. It's a little hard to kind of come up with a customer journey right from the beginning, from the minute you launched. So a little hack for that is we love to take a segmented group of people, invite a few people to come in and kind of beta test this, if you will, where they come in, they go through your process, and then you can ask them a series of detailed and specific questions in order to obtain information on what their journey is. I would recommend probably bare minimum 5 people. 10 people would be better, because then what you can do, you can kind of outline each of their individual journeys, and then you can collate that data and say, okay, here are trends I'm seeing between these 10 journeys. Here's a touch point that I think would be really important, because 6 of the 10 people had this exact same blip essentially on their journey where they would need some extra love and attention. Don't be afraid to ask people for their direct feedback. Sometimes it may sting a little. That's okay. It is all in order to make you better at the end. And trust me, it will come in handy when you make this live and you have way more than 10 people coming through it and everything is set up and seamless. Mistake number 4 is not optimizing for SEO and adding in traffic strategies that are passive. So optimizing for SEO, I feel like that's kind of self-explanatory, but here's a couple places that you could optimize an evergreen webinar. And so your registration page, your watch page, your thank you page for SEO. You can go ahead and add your title, your meta description, your image descriptions, your header tags. Those can all be SEO optimized, as well as like your URL too. So don't forget to do those little things. That's going to help you if people are searching for whatever you're presenting on, and you can kind of start to build up on those passive traffic strategies. You can do this with YouTube as well. So if you want to create like a long-standing video that's going to continue to push people into your webinar, you can also optimize for SEO there, as well as on Pinterest, which is more image-based, obviously, but you could still do that there. So don't miss out on these opportunities to have free traffic, essentially, directly into this evergreen pre-recorded webinar. Then passive traffic strategies. I don't mean ads. That's not passive. You have to have someone managing them. You have to put money into it. That's not passive. I mean, literally the simplest things. Put your link in your bios across your social media platforms. Ensure it's easy to access on your website, whether it's a header bar, it's right up there in your menu bar, or somewhere in your main page. Make sure that people have multiple ways to find your evergreen webinar. This is going to come in so helpful, because even if you're running ads, you're going to have this money. You're spending money to get people in. If you can get some essentially free eyeballs and free registrations for that program wherever you can, you need to capitalize on that, because that's going to impact your bottom line ROI for your entire business. So make sure you're not forgetting about those. One more in that list actually is going to be your email signature. So that's one that a lot of people forget. If this is going to be a main revenue generator for you to bring people into either your bottom tier or high tier programs, even, definitely put it in that email signature. That way anyone you're emailing with back and forth can see this. To recap what we went over today, the 4 biggest things you have to watch out for when you're transitioning your live webinar into an evergreen / pre-recorded model are not updating your content, not using the right software to host your actual webinar, not building automations with your customer journey in mind, and not capitalizing on free traffic wherever and whenever you can. So if you like all things evergreen funnels, all things digital marketing, please hit the follow button below, and we'll see you next week.